Hello, Cinefans. I'm Kendall Kroover, and this is Watching Classic Movies. Millie de Chirico has long been a knowledgeable and accessible champion for classic film. In her work programming for TCM and the TCM Classic Film Festival, as co-host of the essential I Saw What You Did podcast, and now as co-author with Quatoyiah Murry of the amazing book TCM Underground, 50 must-see films from the world of classic cult and late-night cinema. I loved having her back on the show to talk about how changing access to films has widened the landscape for cult flicks, and to dig into some of the fascinating movies Millie wrote about in the book. Welcome, Millie. It's great to have you back on the show again.
Well, thanks for having me back. I'll come back whenever you want me to.
That's a delight, because I always have plenty to ask you. And that's because, it just gets down to this. Thank you so much for your continued influence on what I watch. Because, through the programming at TCM, the midnight screenings at the festival, and the essential I Saw What You Did podcast, and now this book that you've written with Quatoyiah Murry, I'm realizing there's so many things I've gotten into because of your influence. And I really want to thank you off the top here.
Oh my gosh, that's such an honor to hear you say that, because I don't know. I don't know if I have talked about this. I don't think I did in the book necessarily, but I was like a total student of cult movie books when I was growing up. And so if I felt this kind of invisible pressure to like rise to that occasion, because I'm like, oh, here I am trying to join this tradition of these like reference guides, essentially, that were so important for me. And like a lot of people kind of pre-internet, right? So to hear that people actually are using them to watch movies is truly an honor. So thank you for saying that.
I do think it's interesting, the differences in this book compared to other cult movie books, because there really hasn't been kind of a major one since the internet. And think about it. Has there really? There's maybe been some good things that have come out, but not anything that comes from a really deep place of knowledge. And I think so much of what makes it strong is just you two working at this and having access to so many films.
Yeah.
I also just noticed this is the first one that's women.
Yeah.
Brown and Black women. And it really changed the perspective.
Yeah.
Like in what you saw, it broadened what I had as a definition of cult movies. And I really think it's kind of, in some ways, not definable.
Yeah.
It's just a little group gets obsessed with it, but there's more to it,
Yeah.
And it really enriches the experience. But it's also just a lot of those early cult books, you didn't have as much access to movies, period. Like you couldn't go on YouTube or other sneaky snake sites and find whatever.
Yeah.
So you're acknowledging this and taking all your knowledge that you have as a programmer and putting it to this access.
It definitely makes sense. And I think obviously the idea that we are women and women of color, right, writing a book like this was like a huge opportunity, I think, and we both understood that. Because like I said, a lot of books that I was raised on were written by like straight white guys of a certain age range, I would say too. But it was that thing of like, I'm not begrudging those individuals. They certainly like helped me learn. But that was like the time that I grew up in, was that pretty much all of the cult movie people giving me that information, like people who were writing these books, but also like people who owned video stores and on TV, hosting shows that had these films, were for the most part men. And like, that's who I learned from. But I felt like, okay, well, things are different now. Here's an opportunity for maybe me and another woman to kind of come in here and add to that
perspective difference. Yeah.
And that I think is the difference between, and two, like, I think also to your point is the idea that, I think at the very beginning when I was approached to, maybe write a cult movie book for TCM, there was this kind of instinct that people were like, oh, you should do like the 50 greatest cult movies of all time type of thing. And I was like, yeah, I don't know if I want to do it like that. Cause I just felt like that felt so, I don't know. You know how it is when people try to rank things, it becomes, I just thought the rest of my life would be spent on Twitter defending my choices in this like really annoying way, you know, and then just the idea of ranking them or calling them the best or something just felt like we were just picking fights. And I was like, I don't want to do that for the rest of my life. I think we should do it where we pick movies that we just really want to speak to, lots of different reasons for these films to be in the book and then see what happens. And I think that we did a good job with picking the film, like in terms of it being like kind of a good broad representation of the things that have played on Underground.
Yeah, I do think that even if you say something is your favorite, somebody will fight you on it.
Yeah.
You know, and
Yeah.
it's your favorite. So actually that's not, so yeah. And it's just, it takes the love out of it a little bit to
Yeah.
have a best, as opposed to just pulling things out and saying, aren't these great?
Right. And like you said, I mean, the book coming out kind of during this internet age of access to everything, I think was actually a good thing, because I think that it gave people the opportunity to watch some of this stuff, because that certainly was, I spent a lot of time like tracking stuff down from those books. Like I would just make a little list of all the titles that I wanted to see. And then I'd be like, you know, sitting there being like, how do I get a copy of like Rabid Grannies? Like, this is great. Like, do I need to like order it off of the, you know, mail order it, or like go downtown and like try to get the guy to special order it for me because it's not in the video store. So it was like always this like struggle. So the idea that people can actually see some of this stuff is really exciting.
Yeah. To go from, like we were talking, going from walking the aisles of the video store and just looking for the strangest cover.
Yeah.
Going on Tubi. And so, okay, these films, I couldn't believe how surprised I was by some of the choices. Like, oh yeah, that works. Yes, that should be in there. And just how many things I hadn't seen.
Yeah.
I have to mention, sometimes Aunt Martha Does Dreadful Things.
Yeah.
It's just quintessentially a cult film. Some people are getting together and throwing something together. It's a little outrageous, a little camp, but something about it just works.
Yeah. It's, God, I would love to write another book or something about Florida exploitation movies. Because to me, and I think it's because I have spent a lot of time in Florida. I have family in Florida. You know, I grew up in Georgia, which is very close to Florida.
Yeah.
I can definitely speak to the weirdness of that state. Like there is something obviously going on there. I think we know that now, beyond a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah.
It's on one at all times. And I felt like they're just doing research about that film in particular, about trying to figure out like who was involved in that movie.
Yeah.
But also knowing sort of the kind of general era that film was made, knowing that there was like a lot of different like weird Florida movies. And obviously it's like not just like the Doris Wishmans and the Herschel Gordon Lewises, but just like other random people.
Okay, I'm interested in that, definitely.
Yeah. Just was like, oh, well, here I am like watching this movie, which is kind of got this like crazy premise, but then also has like kind of legit good actors. Like I feel like the actor that played Aunt Martha was actually a pretty good actor.
So funny.
Yeah.
Just effortlessly funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then also it did have tints of Herschel Gordon Lewis in that way, where there was like the bright colors and that kind of thing, the sunshine element, the paint colors of the house and that kind of stuff. But like there were just so many weird characters, like side characters in that movie. And I just felt like it really just felt like a product of Florida in so many ways. That
I see it. I see it when you compare it to those other major filmmakers, even, you know, knowing very little beyond that. Like, I don't know what I know about Florida filmmaking beyond that. Oh, could you please write that book? Somebody needs to have you write this book.
Well, you know who I'd love to collaborate on that with. I don't know if you know Liz Purcell, but she is like a queer film historian and is originally from Florida.
Oh,
and
yes.
I think she probably knows more about weird Florida exploitation films than anybody. So I don't, Liz, if you're listening, and you want to collaborate on a book, I'm ready.
You know, that's something I find very interesting about you and the way you work. You seem to really thrive as a collaborator. You like having other people with you. What is it about working with other people that is so appealing to you?
That's so interesting that you say that. I totally agree with you. I don't know what it is. I think I don't know if it's because I played team sports as a child or something. I don't know. I love working with people. And I feel like if I have the opportunity to bring people to the table, like if I have an opportunity to do something, I'm always trying to find like anybody else that wants to get in on it. And I don't know if that is a punk rock ethos that I've kept since I was like a teenager.
Let's start a scene. Yeah.
Yes, like let's get a scene going, let's get a community going. Yeah, I've always been that way. I've never really wanted to be like the lone lead singer of I want to be in a band with like a bunch of other people and we all kind of lift each other up. But I just think it's interesting because it just is like kind of the like two or more heads are better than one concept. And I mean, that's sort of how I felt with Slumber Ground, certainly, because that just was like, I feel like there's so many interesting people that like a lot of different things and have different perspectives and different entry points into movies that I don't have. I mean, that's kind of how I feel about doing the podcast with Danielle, certainly, because we both, I mean, she grew up in New York,
Yeah.
you know, and I am a Southern girl. So we just have different perspectives on the same movie, you know, and I just think that's interesting.
It's just like you could carry something on your own, but it is wonderful to see you thriving in these relationships. Like I forget that's a movie podcast sometimes because you two just get going and it's just, you know, all these things about life and
well, and like I think that's ultimately what the I guess new era maybe of film analysis, film criticism maybe is hearing people talk about films personally. I love hearing that. Like I love hearing how people got into movies and how they first saw this movie with their grandpa on the couch, and then, you know, kind of that background information that I felt like kind of really didn't exist pre-internet in a way. Like I just felt like people just kind of reviewed movies and they were being like very, I don't know, sort of academic about it. But so many people like podcasts, like with people with podcasts like you or anybody, that's what those things do is you're able to really like figure out who's liking what and how they got into what. And maybe that's similar to how you did it. You know what I mean?
Bringing people together and also drawing them in. Yeah. It's like welcoming people in. I mean, because I was, you know, my dad got me into the classics, but I was for the most part on my own. But then with the internet, I am having a conversation with somebody about movies, you know, friends I've met online every day because it's so easy to do that.
Yeah.
And I do love that sense of community. And I think that with the way you do things, you're kind of encouraging that, you know, sort of community.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have to talk to you about Remember My Name.
Yes.
I wanted to see this for years and I finally found it the Sneaky Snake way. And now it's on Tubi. I love that you wrote about this movie. Tell me about Remember My Name.
So like you said, this was a movie that was dying to see for years.
Yeah.
And part of like because this movie, I think Underground, you know, which is TCM Underground, you know, the franchise that I used to program, was kind of this like, I don't know, a Trojan horse is the word, but it was like a way to bring rare movies to the network and with the hopes that maybe people would watch it or put it on their DVR or something like that, right? This was my whole game when I was there because I was like, I really want to watch Remember My Name. I feel like I can fit it in Underground somehow.
Yes.
And then realizing that there was TV rights on it and there wasn't home video, you know, and I was just like, oh my God, this is an opportunity. Let's put this on TV. And so after I was able to watch it, I just became obsessed with it because it really was like that kind of melodrama that I love, which is kind of like a creepy melodrama, like a melodrama that could easily move into horror or thriller. You know what I mean?
Uncomfortable. Uncomfortable.
Yes. So, and of course, I mean, I love the director, Alan Rudolph. Like, I feel like that's like a director that needs something like and a lot of his movies haven't been available, which I think is like a huge reason why, you know, he's not this, at least at this current moment, like he feels like he's ripe for discovery, right? Because his movie, like Choose Me is not online, I don't think anywhere. This movie wasn't. Yeah. So there's like a lot of, because I think it's like he uses a lot of like kind of popular music or like I'm just guessing it's music.
It's potentially right. Okay.
Right. I had to watch Choose Me. I had to rent a bootleg of it from a video store that they had some old copy of it that they put on a disc or something.
I just thought that was much bigger than that. But then
Yeah.
the most enormous films need to be restored and are dying. So I guess it doesn't mean
Yeah.
anything, really.
Yeah. But I feel like Remember My Name has just recently become talked about again because now it's on Tubi and people can watch it. But when I wrote about it, I was like in the middle of the obsession where I was just like, I just want to talk about this movie all the time. But it's essentially, you know, a movie about a character who was played by Geraldine Chaplin, who of course is the daughter of Charlie Chaplin. And she's so great.
She takes risks.
Oh
Her
yeah.
whole career.
Absolutely. And there is this like butch quality to her that I love in this movie. Because I feel like there's this, you know, and maybe this is, I'm putting the cart before the horse here, but there's this kind of weird gender reversal, gender play thing going on.
That's so obvious. I didn't,
Right. And this is like, if I swear if I could write like 5,000 words about this movie, I would have done it for the book. But, you know, Geraldine Chaplin's character is kind of being released from prison. As it turns out, she was in jail for killing the girlfriend of her ex-husband, who was played by Anthony Perkins. And then she gets out of jail, is basically trying to find him. And it turns out he's in a new relationship with a woman who is played by Barry Berenson, who was Anthony Perkins' actual wife at the time. And it's this real like slow moving, are they gonna meet face to face? Because she kind of starts out kind of stalking him and going to his work and kind of showing up, you know, outside of their house, and it's getting really creepy.
Yeah.
And it's like this dance of whether or not she's actually gonna confront him or not. And then meanwhile, she's trying to kind of get back into normal society post incarceration, and she tries to get a job, and it's like she's just unable to really doing that successfully. Like she's just unable to be around people, but then it's, you know, it's just that whole story
that really struck me, the way she couldn't function with people.
Yeah,
I haven't not really seen that done so well, where things are just not clicking. She just doesn't know how to be with humans.
Yeah. And there are like sounds in the film that I think are kind of like in her mind, she always hears the jail. Like she's always hearing the clink of the prison bars and everything. And it kind of like reverberates in her mind as like a reminder of where she just was. And she kind of can't help but, you know, she has a bit of Stockholm syndrome. She kind of like role plays a little bit with this like landlord of hers in the film, who is played by Moses Gunn. And she kind of enters into this like maybe sexual relationship with him, but it's very associated with her incarceration. And so she's just unable to really kind of get out of it. Yeah. But then there's all these allusions to her own prison, which is this man she used to be involved with. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the most interesting component to all this is that this character is played, this man that she's obsessed with and she can't get out of her head, is played by Anthony Perkins. And so in my mind, I'm thinking like, he's sort of a femme fatale in a weird way. Like he plays that role of this person in her life who she can't forget and that she's haunted by, and he plays kind of fast and loose with all these things. And then also like Barry Berenson in this role, she kind of has herself this like butch quality to her, like the way they kind of both smoke cigarettes and they both kind of have this like masculine quality to them, which I feel like is maybe on purpose because of
is it his type, you know?
Yeah. But also like Anthony Perkins, you know, sort of knowing about him, and because he plays a construction worker in the movie, which is also like so fascinating because you're just like
generally playing these emotionally frail, neurotic, flighty characters, and it's like, no, I'm going to be a construction worker.
Yes, and
it
you're
works
like,
because it doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I love about the movie, is that it's, because I think a lot of like people at the time that the movie was released were saying like, oh, this is not believable. Anthony Perkins cannot play a construction worker. Are you kidding me? He's like America's nerdy psycho, you know? It was for this role, particularly for this, you know, universe that they're in.
A combination of actors too.
Yeah.
No, it worked perfectly. Oh God, yes, all of that. But I hadn't really thought about the similarities between the women. But that was something that made it work for me on a certain level, because when they do the whole thing where the new relationship is a completely different person, I'm like, no, people kind of have types. Like they might date different kinds of people, but they generally have types. There has to be something kind of tying them together. And that really happens here. Like when they face each other, it's not one person stronger than the other in some respects.
Yeah.
Like they face each other as equals with similar points of view in some ways.
Yeah.
Just,
Oh,
yeah.
absolutely. And they kind of have in that moment, they're both kind of like in their kitchen.
Yeah.
And
it was so scary.
Oh, it's terrifying. And it's kind of this like
emotionally
weird, like Geraldine Chaplin is like on the other side of the wall, where she's trying to and they're going around the house, like she's kind of stalking her. And that's where I was like, wow.
I almost couldn't stand it.
Yeah.
But I was so thrilled. This movie made me so uncomfortable, but in the most amazing way. Like it just made me think about the awkwardness of some people and slotting themselves in and how dangerous it can be to not be able to slot yourself in.
Yeah.
I thought about what I reject about that and how you kind of have to get along, but in some ways, why? I don't know. It was a wonderful mess.
Yeah. I just really encourage people to see it.
So there's another one that is just, it's so good. It's no budget, no stars, and yet there's just this feeling of class to it, and that's the Honeymoon Killers.
Oh yeah.
Ooh. It's so, again, another thing where it's kind of disturbing and it's about not kind of fitting into the world, but there's something so weirdly classy about it at the same time. It's a lot.
Yeah.
Like it's filmed beautifully. The music is beautiful,
Yeah. I mean, it is independent. It really like set the table for a lot of that kind of like independent cinema of the 90s almost in that way, where I mean it kind of has like a Cassavetes quality to it, like in that way, because obviously like time wise it was made around that same era that Cassavetes was working, but it could easily be like an early Jim Jarmusch movie or something. Like it just kind of has that quality to it. And maybe I'm thinking of like, I don't know, Stranger Than Paradise, which was also filmed in black and white and also features like weird road trip Americana type stuff. But I feel like in a weird way, writing about it was sort of like, it was one of the films I think in the book, because we were trying to balance the films that we felt like had been discussed a lot with the films that hadn't been discussed as much, like Remember My Name or something like that. But like Honeymoon Killers is like, oh, a lot of people have seen it by now. I think it's on Criterion Collection. Maybe people would know this a lot more than some of the other stuff. But even when I was like writing about it, like just thinking about it in a cult movie context, I was like, wow, yeah, this movie like kind of hits so many of those buttons. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Especially when it comes down to like the actual like terror of the film, which is like, it's pretty gruesome.
Yeah. It's the nature of the murders. It's very intimate.
Yes.
And that's always more disturbing because it's somebody looking in somebody's eyes and
Yeah.
In their space, living in their space. Yeah. That makes it harder to take.
Yeah. And also there is we keep going back to melodrama because I think we always will. Because
I just
you and I,
by how it's so much deeper than people seem to understand.
Yeah. Well, and like the melodrama quality of it to me is about the desire component of the film, which is that here is a woman who is lonely and she's looking for companionship. And just like in that kind of melodrama / like grand dame guignol type of storyline, is kind of willing to go to extremes in order to keep people in her life, to keep men in her life. So that concept to me is really interesting. And just because I'm a fan of melodrama and because so much of like what melodrama, the reason why it's maligned a lot is because it's, women's stories, quote unquote, like those issues that women seem to have, but that men don't, or something, it's like some crazy thing like that. But that's what fascinates me about the Honeymoon Killers is, I mean, it's obviously based off of a true crime, but I think that part of it gets really connected in the movie, which is that you can see the jealousy in Martha's face as she's on this road trip with this man who is, saying to her, hey, we have to, steal money from these women. And in order to do that, I have to pretend to be in love with him. And then you have to watch it. Yeah.
Well, just the fact that it's this Graham character that's somehow not meant to be attractive, but she is very attractive to me because
Me too.
Well, I mean, just something about her visually is attractive to me, but it's also just that I understand her heart's desire so well. She somehow communicates that
Yes.
without being soft in the way that you would think somebody would be soft. But like when there's a scene at the lake where she becomes overcome with his attentions to their mark.
Yes.
She's not so sure it's a mark at a certain point, and just that gentleness of heart with a very dramatic reaction. It's so powerful.
Yeah. So that scene of the film is, I think, like the most compelling. And I truly had to stop myself from going like 100 pages on it when I was writing about it, because I was like, I want to like dissect it frame by frame. I'm just obsessed with it, because when I was doing my research about this film, there seemed to have been, and I don't know this for certain, so I don't want to like go on record saying that this is fact, but it felt to me that the director and the financier maybe were gay men and maybe were out at the time, which I think, and again, I don't know what their lives were, and I don't know if they were out, even subsequently when they were doing interviews for like the Criterion Collection DVD and stuff. But I feel like that's an interesting kind of note to think about when you think about this scene in particular, but when you think about like this movie in particular, about it being a melodrama. But it's a thing where she's like watching this man that she's obsessed with and she loves be with somebody, and she can't interact because it's going to destroy their whole game. She's in this very vulnerable position because she's on the beach and she's in a bathing suit. You know what I mean?
Exposed, yeah.
She's exposed, and there's this whole like concept of weight and stuff that is in the film, which means that she, I think at this moment, is kind of looking at this guy and this being with this other woman going like, oh, this is who he really wants. He wants to be with her and not me. And he doesn't actually love me. He's set up a scenario where he can have me do what he wants. And then he gets to also be with other women and stuff. And just that whole thing gets captured in this scene. There's that whole concept.
It hits so hard because you're later on thinking about what it all means.
Yeah.
Like all those little pieces. I was like, this is just it. This is the movie.
Yeah.
Right here. Yeah. It's a remarkable. It's definitely one of those ones that I'll just go back to again and again.
Yeah.
And it just, when I think about perfect classics from the studio age, I'll think about something like Casablanca or Double Indemnity. And I think this is maybe my cold 70s small budget version of that, where it's just impeccably done and remarkable given that it's a novice director.
That's like the one thing that blew me away about all of it, is that these were like everybody's kind of like first goes. And obviously, Shirley Stoller and Tony Lombianco would go on to do a lot of stuff, like both of them. But they were like kind of theater people still in this era. And I'm not sure either of them had made a movie yet. I mean, I know maybe Shirley Stoller hadn't, but it's that thing of like everybody was kind of new at it. There's just that kind of pioneer energy to this movie that is so cool.
Open things. Yeah.
Okay,
they have one more. Could probably just have a 10-hour episode talking about every single title in the book. but there's one that's in contrast a bit, but also in the same spirit, and that's Mary Jane's Not a Virgin Anymore. This is my era when I was out of college and just watching movies constantly, had my little punch card, would just constantly go to the repertoire theater, saw everything in the 90s, and I did not see this one. It just wasn't out there. And discovering it, I guess it was AGFA. I think it's through there that I was discovering the filmmaker Sarah Jacobson and realizing that we'd lost her very young and there wasn't going to be more.
Yeah.
And that was so sad to me, because this movie really encapsulated the 90s for me. I knew these people, and that was a strange thing. Like Singles did it in a way, but didn't really peg it the way this movie does. So tell me about this movie.
This movie was, again, another maybe something that wouldn't, like, it's underground in the sense that it just was like unknown. Like it did feel like a lot of people knew this. It felt underground to me because it was like directed kind of like in a DIY, like female filmmaker, like kind of using a lot of her friends and her social circle to have people in the film and stuff. And it was a lot of like musicians and everything. I mean, that was the 90s in a nutshell, right? It was kind of that do-it-yourself aesthetic, but I mean, essentially it's a movie about a young woman who is trying to discover herself romantically and sexually. And, you know, she's working at a movie theater, and she's kind of befriended this like crew of people that work in the movie theater. And basically she's just trying to figure out herself, and what she's trying to find pleasure in her relationships. And she like loses her virginity sort of towards the beginning, middle of the film, and it's really unremarkable. Like she's just kind of like has like a, you know, a bad, like I'm sure most people of their first time was just not great.
Yeah.
And then she sort of decides like, I'm never doing that again. Like it was terrible, like forget it. But then she becomes involved with this other guy that she works with. And it's like this total formative relationship for her, where I think for the first time she kind of figures out like, oh, this is actually what I want. And this is like how I want to feel when I'm having intercourse, and I want to like be in this type of relationship. And so it's just that thing where it's very bold, because you don't ever get to see stories like that, at least at that moment too.
A woman that age,
a woman
what
that
she
age
desires, like, taken seriously. Yeah,
exactly. And it's pretty raw in that way. It's not like a rom-com type of scenario. It's like having sex in the car type of stuff, but like in the graveyard, like whatever, when she loses her virginity in the graveyard or something. I'm like, oh my God, it's like real stuff.
Age of just things happening. The next day you're like, excuse me, what did I do?
Yeah. And it's not like a movie that spans a lot of time, or it's not like there's not like huge epic, you know, scenes. It's just truly like a kind of slice of life, you know, coming of age movie. But it really does like go into what a young woman wants. And I just find that really bold.
It's so honest about the people you run into at that age.
Definitely.
It's just all these unusual relationships. You just randomly go over to somebody's house and they've got this extreme interest and you're fascinated. There's this guy in the movie that has all these smiley faces in his apartment. Just stuff like that. Like I remember, you know, things like that. Just like, oh, you've got this little studio apartment and it's full of taxidermy, or, you know, just finding unusual characters like that and trying to figure out how you feel about it, and kind of wondering half the time if you're safe, you know, like how do I be happy? How do I grow up? It just captured all that so well. I just love that movie.
Yeah. And it's also like a great movie about like having jobs. You're in this job with like mixed company, like there's like men and women and whoever just sort of like circulating around, and you're mixing with it, like everybody's kind of slept with everybody, or everybody's dated everybody, and you're like, oh, this guy's sort of this, and you know, that guy was so that. And it's so, I remember that I had so many jobs like that where it was kind of this like everybody's young and they're just trying to figure it out, and just what happens,
just kind of living and messing around, and you have this freedom all of a sudden. No, it's just perfect that way. I'm like sitting here looking at this list of movies, and I could go on forever, but you know, all I can do is encourage people to read this book, because it really is quite a mix of movies. It really is very satisfying, the variety of it. I think you two have done an amazing job with it, and I just appreciate the knowledge you brought to it, Millie. And I always enjoy talking to you so much. So I thank you so much for coming on again. Yeah.
Likewise, Kendall. I think you're so smart about film, and I'm so glad that you have had me on so many times, and I just really respect what you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Go to watchingclassicmovies.com for more information about Millie and Quatoyiah's book. Enjoying the show? I would love it if you'd rate and review wherever you listen. Your support means a lot. Thank you for listening. This is Kendall Cruver, watching classic movies. Until next time.